They were executed while sleeping, 8 members of the same family, spread over 3 residences in a concerted attack. The killers spared 3 youngsters, indicating a deliberate and intentional act of brutality. What detectives discovered next revealed a stunning motivation, a complex custody scheme, and a family determined to ruin everything to get their way. They were exhausted while they slept. Not one, not twice. 8 lives, gone. Everyone comes from the same family. All were executed in cold blood. This was not a robbery. It was not arbitrary. And it was definitely not just a dispute gone wrong. This was a planned ambush that took place in the dead of night at 3 different residences owned by the Roden family. Date, April 22, 2016. Pike County, Ohio. A community where residents wave to one another on dirt roads, leave doors unlocked, and keep their families near. But on that morning, the tranquility was shattered. Someone, or several someones, broke into the family's home while they were sleeping and carried out what is now regarded as the deadliest slaughter in Ohio history. The family's father, Christopher Roden Sr., was shot 9 times, 5 to the face. What about his cousin Gary? Shot through the head at point-blank range. The muzzle left a mark on his skull. What about Chris Kid Frankie and his fiancée Hannah? Murdered in their bed. Their 4-month-old infant slept sweetly between their lifeless corpses. Dana Roden, 5 gunshots to the head. Chris Jr., then 16, was shot twice through the top of his skull while sleeping. Hannah Mae was killed down just days after giving birth, with her child still trying to suckle from her when she was discovered. And here's the bit that doesn't make sense unless you already know the twisted motivation behind everything. 3 youngsters were spared, deliberately, carefully, almost lovingly. One was discovered laying on the floor, another, in bed with their slain parents. A third is still clinging to their mother. It was not luck. It was not mercy. This was part of the strategy. That's what distinguishes this situation. The majority of killers panic. Most leave a trail, but not here. No shell casings. There are no traces of struggle. Even the family's typically ferocious pit dogs remained silent. Whoever did this was familiar with the residences, the habits, and the task at hand. They didn't just want to kill. They sought to take out any adult who could be in their way. And they almost succeeded. Even the most convoluted designs have one flaw. And in this situation, the weak point was the child they were attempting to keep. What happened next revealed one of the most sinister, unsettling reasons investigators had ever witnessed. This was not just murder. This was execution, precise, quiet, and completely uncaring. Whoever carried it out did not simply want people dead. They wanted them eliminated. No warnings. There's no struggle, no way to fight back. The Roden family was pursued like prey, with each victim shot with terrifying precision, as if the assassins had prepared for this moment. 5 gunshots to the head, 3 times through the face, sometime when they were still sleeping, others as they reached for their children. The youngest adult victim had just given birth 4 days before. She was slain while trying to nurse her infant. What frightened investigators more than the dead was what wasn't present. No shell casings, no cell phones. There are no noises. No one in the area heard a single gunshot. This is due to the killer's use of homemade suppressors, which were effective. You don't stumble across anything like that unless you've been planning for weeks, perhaps months. And then there's the phone. Every gadget was gone, not stolen in a frenzy, taken purposefully, because the phones were more than simply communication tools. They were proof, evidence that might track movements, reveal communications, or identify suspects. However, the perpetrator was aware of this, and they didn't leave any screens behind. This was not a jealous ex. This wasn't some inebriated uncle breaking under pressure. This was organized, precise, and incredibly intimate. When detectives walked into those crime scenes, they sensed something was wrong. The blood, the dead, the newborns left behind, it didn't add up. Unless the motivation wasn't simply to murder, but control. What about that control? It focuses on one youngster. Those willing to murder for her would go to any length to obtain their desired outcome. The bodies hadn't even cooled when stories spread. When officials discovered unlawful grow operations and reports of animal violence on the Roden farm, speculations circulated quickly. This was no longer merely a family tragedy. It appeared to be a professional attack. People began asking a far darker question. Was the Roden family involved in something considerably more hazardous than everyone realized? One of the first leads detectives pursued was a suspected link to a Mexican cartel. The cruelty matched. Close-range headshots, complete quiet. No one was spared, except the children. It had all the characteristics of a cartel operation. After all, cartels don't only kill. They send messages. What about Pike County, Ohio? That is not where these groups typically operate. Nonetheless, authorities could not ignore it, especially after uncovering a marijuana cultivation plot hidden near Kenneth Roden's farm. Quiet, remote, and off the grid, the ideal location for growing big quantities of goods without being discovered. Ultimately, 8 individuals died. The Cornbread Mafia was later given another name, a lesser-known but equally dangerous group that emerged from Central Appalachia. They were not showy. They were not international. However, they were strongly embedded in the local landscape. This group was notorious for operating pill mills, meth laboratories, and underground networks throughout Kentucky and Ohio. For years, they had remained hidden in the hollers, avoiding detection. Violent, yes, capable of such bloodshed. Despite widespread skepticism, they have the necessary reach. And the motive? Now law enforcement was caught in a whirlwind of possibilities. Was this drug-related? Is there a gang war? A discreet warning from an underground organization? With cockfighting cages discovered and unusual behavior on the Roden property, it was not difficult for the neighborhood, or detectives, to suspect the worst. Perhaps the Rodens became connected with the wrong people. Maybe someone became greedy. Perhaps someone in the family was hiding something deeper. But none of these explanations addressed one crucial detail. The children were unharmed, protected, spared on purpose. That did not sound like cartel work. That did not apply to the Cornbread Mafia either. That amount of targeting? That pointed to something else, closer to home. When detectives focused on family turmoil instead of chasing shadows, they discovered evidence that surpassed cartel hypotheses. All routes suddenly led back to the same name, Wagner. Not a gang, not outsiders. However, a local family has strong links to the Rodens and even deeper mysteries. And at the core of it all was Jake Wagner, Hannah Roden's ex-boyfriend and the father of her daughter Sophia. From the outside, the Wagners appeared to be a close-knit, church-going family. Behind closed doors, they were dictatorial, insular, and concerned with retaining Sophia at any cost. Jake and Hannah's relationship was not a typical teenage love tale gone awry. It was poisonous from the beginning. Jake was older, controlling, possessive. The longer they were together, the worse things grew. Hannah told in friends that she felt bound, not only by Jake, but by his entire family, who seemed to be watching everything she did. She couldn't breathe without being watched. Jake wasn't simply upset when she attempted to leave. He became calculated. He desired custody of Sophia, complete control. And with that, the Wagners turned from ex-boyfriends to compulsive manipulators prepared to go to any length to take a child who was not theirs to begin with. Even after the murders, they attempted to play the part of concerned relatives. Jake even went so far as to file for custody of Sophia, as if he hadn't recently lost his child's mother in a violent ambush. The papers raised every possible red flag, signed by Hannah, apparently, before her death, giving Jake exclusive custody if anything happened to her. How convenient. But no one dared to speak it out, not at first, because the concept that a whole family, parents and boys, would plan a slaughter for custody? That sounded ridiculous, until you looked closer. Because the Wagner family began to vanish, rather than simply appearing suspicious. They packed everything, left Ohio, and headed to Alaska. Not exactly what innocent people do following a mass murder. And here's the kicker. When they returned a year later, it was as if nothing had occurred. New jobs, smiles, a fresh start. But, behind the surface, something was wrong. The same family that had formerly sequestered themselves was now claiming to be model citizens. Everything was all an act, and everything would soon come apart. Because the reality about Jake, Hannah, and Sophia was far more sinister than anybody anticipated. The next narrative would reveal that the Wagners were more than merely involved. They were the masterminds. It was not about money. It was not about vengeance. It was all about control. The type of control that transforms love into obsession and infatuation into murder. The Wagner family's wishes were straightforward. They wanted Sophia, Jake's daughter, but more crucially, they did not want to share her. Not with Hannah, not with the Rodens, not with anybody. When Hannah made it plain that she would not give up full custody, something in the Wagner home broke. They did not go to court. They did not bargain. They gathered around a table, as if in a sick family gathering, and made a decision. If they couldn't have Sophia completely, no one else could live to stop them. And sure, they did vote on it. They compiled a list. A kill list. Not at random. Not emotional. Strategic. They targeted anyone with a legal or emotional claim to Sophia. One by one. Parents. Siblings. Including distant cousins. Anyone who could file a legal challenge or speak out publicly became a target. Jake wasn't only unhappy over his breakup. He was engulfed with jealousy. Hannah had moved on. She was seeing somebody fresh. She'd recently had another child. Jake considered that an insult rather than sadness. For a person like him, rejection was more than simply hurtful. It was intolerable. Angela Wagner, the matriarch, also performed her part. She was not a bystander. She was falsifying paperwork behind the scenes, including bogus custody papers that designated Jake as Sophia's sole guardian in the event Hannah died. And guess what? Those documents were ready prior to the killings. Think about it. The Wagners' goal was more than just gaining custody. They sought to eliminate the competition. They desired a blank slate. No fights, no tribunals, no rodents. Sophia has complete control. And to do this, they were ready to kill not one, not two, but 8 individuals. What is the most terrifying part? They felt they could get away with it. They assumed that by silencing everyone, no one would ever dispute the custody transfer. Nobody would ever look at them sideways. Nobody would ever know what truly transpired that night. But they were mistaken. The youngster they attempted to take was ultimately the key to exposing them all. This was not a spontaneous action. This was designed as a military operation. The Wagners did not wake up one day and resolve to terminate their family. They prepared. For months. Every motion, every detail, every tool. They purchased firearms, but not just any guns. Guns that were silent and had little recoil, allowing them to shoot up close without missing. They chose .22 caliber rifles and pistols, which produce less noise and are simpler to wield in cramped areas. Then came suppressors, which are devices designed to silence gunshots. Not professional-grade silencers, but handmade versions. Crude, effective, the type of thing you create in your garage while you're trying not to wake the neighbors while killing a family. They did not stop there. They affixed brass catchers to their rifles, which are little bags that trap discarded shot casings and ensure nothing is left behind. No bullets, no evidence. If possible, they would leave no trace, which is precisely why they purchased new sneakers. But not for style. They chose shoes that did not fit, purchased at Walmart, still within the box. Why? Because if the authorities discovered any prints, they would not match the Wagners' actual shoe size. Each phase of the crime was intended to fool, and things grow worse. They also purchased a mobile phone jamming device to disrupt all communications in the region on the night of the killings. So, even if someone did wake up and grab for a phone, it would not work. No text, no calls, no assistance. Angela Wagner, the mother, kept behind the scenes, creating bogus custody paperwork to make everything appear legitimate. She falsified Hannah Roden's signature. Hannah said she granted Jake complete custody of Sophia in case something happened to her. And the papers? The plan was already in place before the Rodens were slain. What says guilt more than that? Meanwhile, Jake and George spent hours training in the woods, shooting at trees, checking their equipment, and preparing for what they knew was coming. When investigators eventually inspected the area, they discovered burned-out suppressors, shell pieces, and signs of months of planning. This was hardly a crime of passion. It was a blueprint, a step-by-step strategy for erasing a family and walking away clean. But even the best-laid schemes have flaws. Despite their cleverness, the Wagners couldn't stay hidden indefinitely. They did not blink. They did not hesitate. They slaughtered an entire family in the dark and then vanished. The Wagners went to work on the night of April 21st, 2016, as the rest of Pike County slept. They swept through rodent dwellings one by one, like cold, quiet beasts. No forced entries. There's no noise. Only cold steel, muted gunfire, and bodies remained behind. They understood the layout. They were familiar with the timetables. And they knew who had to leave. Christopher Roden, Sr. First, the man they considered as the most serious danger to Jake's custody case. Then Frankie and Hannah Gilly were shot while resting in bed, their infant lying between them. Dana Roden had 5 shots to the head. Her adolescent son, Chris Jr., executed while sleeping. Hannah Roden was killed just days after giving birth, close to her baby. However, every youngster was spared. That was not mercy. That was strategy. The Wagners did not murder the youngsters since they posed no threat. They only killed adults who could fight back, testify, or appear in court and say, "No, Sophia doesn't belong to you." It was targeted. It was personal. And it was scary. When the killing ended, the cleanup started. They did not only throw their firearms into the woods or bury them behind the house. That'd be too sloppy. Instead, they placed the murder weapons, guns, silencers, and bullet casings in gallon buckets of wet cement, transforming them into improvised boat anchors, and had a relative dump them in a lake. Gone. Out of sight. Out of grasp. They even trashed their clothing and abandoned the truck used in the murders. Every object and trace was eliminated, and then they packed their luggage and departed. To Alaska, Not a vacation, not a break, a full-blown escape. A family of 4, accused of murdering 8, escaped into the woods thousands of miles distant. New names, new lives, new jobs, smiling in public while concealing one of the most premeditated killings Ohio has ever witnessed. They believed they had buried it. They figured they'd start afresh. But they didn't know how much they had left behind. What occurred when they returned would reveal everything. They felt they had gotten away with. They returned from Alaska cheerful. I took on new employment, acted normally. The Wagners integrated back into Pike County like any other calm, industrious family. But something seemed odd, too perfect, too rehearsed. And soon, the mask began to slide. It began tiny, with unusual comments and awkward conduct. But the true fissures appeared when 2 ladies abruptly departed the Wagner family. One was Jake's new bride, the other, his mother, Angela. Both vanished without warning. No goodbyes. There's no explanation. Just left. What happened when investigators discovered what they had told their family privately? That was when the tide changed. Behind the scenes, the Wagners were not a family, but rather a cult-like group dominated by deception, control, and terror. Every choice went through Billy or Angela. Marriages were watched. Outside friends were discouraged. And when someone attempted to break loose, they were cut off. So what prompted these women to run? What did they hear? What did they see? Most importantly, what were they scared would happen next? The investigators recognized this as their window, so they made a move. Listening devices were placed inside work vehicles, phones were tapped, and conversations were discreetly recorded. It was a daring risk, but it paid off, because the Wagners were not simply concealing bodies. They were concealing realities that they could not stop talking about. Boasting, "I messed up," allowing just enough detail to come out of their mouths to complete the jigsaw. Suddenly, everything that appeared too clean made sense. The cement-filled buckets. The documents were fabricated. The escape to Alaska. It wasn't random. It was a cover-up. And now, the folks who felt they were the sharpest in the room have stepped right into their own trap. However, it wasn't only words that took them down. The next discovery by investigators would provide significant information about the case. Jake Wagner cracked. After 2 years in prison, the stillness eventually got to him. He was not a martyr. He was not faithful. He was afraid. And as the strain reached its climax, Jake did what cowards do. He folded. He did not only admit to 1 murder. He acknowledged to 5, having pulled the trigger himself. He abandoned the scheme, the timeline, the weaponry, the roles that each family member played. No more secrets. No more falsehoods. Just the naked, nasty reality of what the Wagners did that evening. Jake revealed everything. How they obtained the suppressors, fabricated the custody documents, trained in the woods, and even used cement-filled buckets to sink the evidence. He mentioned names. His father, his brother, his mother. Nobody was safe. Angela Wagner, who has always pretended to be a peacemaker. She was the one who falsified the custody docs and helped arrange the entire scheme. George Wagner, not just some innocent bystander. Jake claims that he personally shot 3 of the victims. So much for the family values. Jake didn't let out his guilt. He did it for a bargain. The death sentence was an option, not just for him, but for all 4 Wagners. So he made a deal. Full confession in return for life in prison, no release for 32 years, and the state would save his family from the death penalty. Let it sink in. Despite his involvement in the death of 8 individuals, he hoped for a different ending. His confession was terrible, cold, detailed. He discussed shooting for heads. He described how they traveled between residences, who shot whom, and what happened thereafter. It was more than simply a confession. It was a plan for evil. Jake's testimony brought down the whole Wagner family. Angela received 30 years. George IV, 8 life sentences, without the possibility of parole. Billy Wagner, the so-called mastermind, was still awaiting trial, but Jake's remarks echoed through every courtroom hallway, sealing his destiny. But here's the bit that'll never seem right. Jake Wagner assisted in the planning and execution of one of the most premeditated mass executions in state history, and he is still alive to tell the story. What about the Roden family's surviving members? No amount of justice is sufficient. Justice was served, but it didn't seem like justice. For the Roden family's surviving members, no punishment could ever repair what was done. 8 lives were taken. Entire lineages were wiped off. And all because one family couldn't bear losing ownership of a child. Jake Wagner received a life sentence with the possibility of release after 32 years. Angela, the lady who helped fabricate the falsehood that started it all, was sentenced to 30 years. George IV, the one who refused to comply, received the heaviest punishment, 8 life sentences without the possibility of release. He chose silence, and the court reciprocated. But one guy remained on trial, George "Billy" Wagner III, the father, enforcer, and architect of the plot. His trial became one of Ohio's most anticipated events in recent years. Everyone was waiting to see if the man who engineered a slaughter to obtain custody of a kid would finally face the consequences. And if there was any justice remaining, he would pursue it. But here's the frightening part. While the Wagners grow old in prison, Sophia will inherit a heritage she never asked for. Imagine one day discovering that your mother, uncles, grandparents, and nearly everyone else in your bloodline had been murdered in a single night. Your father ruined everything around you because he wanted to keep you so much. No child deserves that. And no amount of courtroom words or jail time will erase the fact that the Wagners committed one of the most cold-blooded crimes in modern American history while pretending to be a regular family throughout. The scars in Pike County will never entirely heal. However, with each conviction, punishment, and fracture in the Wagner family's twisted empire, there is one little piece of resolution. They felt they could gain custody by eliminating the competitors. Instead, they ruined their own lives in the process.